Good morning, everyone. I'm Kimberly Chalia with PHCA. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar. A few quick updates to share before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website. The webinar has been approved for 1.5 continuing education credits for all attendees. For those who provided a NAB number, credits will be uploaded shortly. As we begin today, all attendees should be in listen-only mode. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have during the session using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to answer as many of those questions as possible at the end of today's presentation. And now a quick word from today's sponsor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Candace McMullen, and I currently serve as the Executive Vice President of Business Development and Consulting with Affinity Health Services. Affinity is pleased to partner with PHCA as the sponsor of your webinar today. Affinity provides comprehensive management and consulting for all service lines in the senior living industry. Our clients are nursing homes, personal care homes, independent living housing providers, as well as life plan communities. In my current role, I oversee the consulting division, where our team of talented and experienced professionals provides a full continuum of consulting services. An individualized service plan to complement your management team is established for each of our clients, and from there, your dedicated Affinity consultants support you to meet your business objectives. When you partner with Affinity, you have the leverage of industry experts who are also providers, just like you, experiencing the same day-to-day challenges. Our consultants provide field-validated solutions to assist you in meeting your profitability, efficiency, and compliance goals. For over 25 years, Affinity Health Services has provided proven solutions in our advisory, consulting, and management services. I welcome the opportunity to further explore how we can partner in enhancing your business outcomes. To learn more about Affinity, please visit our website at www.affinityhealthservices.net. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Ken, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Ken Daly, and I am a licensed administrator, but also life safety and emergency preparedness specialist, providing life safety services across the country. And today, we're going to talk about life safety code, and I think I named this documentation happening for success. And the reality is life safety has continued to receive a fair amount of attention. Pennsylvania's always been on, I guess, my theoretical top 10 list of states that have the most citations. And so it's just really important to recognize that as CMS continues to kind of tighten the scrutiny on life safety, the importance of documenting those items that are required. Now, remember the code. I mean, we are 7 years in now to the Life Safety Code 2012 edition. And CMS is not planning to update a newer code anytime soon. So the 2012 edition, this is the book. If you were going to buy the book at the NFPA.org website or on Amazon, it's a 2012 edition, and it's not a building code. So it's not, again, the Pennsylvania Building Code or the Pennsylvania Fire Code. It is different. There may be times where Pennsylvania Fire Code references the NFPA, but it is different. I am actually, my home state is in Ohio, and Ohio, like Pennsylvania, have their own fire codes and their own fire marshals who may do similar surveys, and they may be considered AHJs or authorities having jurisdiction. But for CMS, for survey, for compliance, for Medicare and Medicaid payment, the NFPA documents are the ones that we have to follow. And so it is, like I said, different than a building code. There's really nothing in life safety because it tells you how to do something. It just tells you what they expect to see if you're standing someplace. And so back 7 years ago, we adopted two different codes. When I use the word code, I guess I could use the word law, but CMS through Congress has referenced the NFPA. So rather than Congress or CMS, I suppose, putting together a federal law on life safety, they have chosen to reference the NFPA's Life Safety Code, which is NFPA 101, Life Safety Code, and NFPA 99, which is the Healthcare Facilities Code. And Healthcare Facilities Code used to be a standard previously, and today it's a code. So it's really, both these books are the law that we have to follow. Now, there's some other reference standards and guidelines that we have to follow that we'll talk about today. But these are the two books. And again, these are both 2012 editions. You'll be tempted to buy 2015, 18, 21, and this next month, actually 24 will get approved. So, but no, CMS, as I said, is not going to move forward on adopting new codes anytime soon. And some of the other codes that are going to be referenced as we talk today are things like NFPA 110, which is or a generator, or as they say, standards on emergency standby power systems, or NFPA 70, which is National Electrical Code, or NFPA 80, fire doors, and so on and so forth. These are just the top 10 or 12 references. There's actually some 50 reference code books that CMS uses for compliance. But overall, these are the ones that are the leading issues that I've seen out there. So the survey process itself, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, is they have broken into really 6 areas of K tags. K tag is the 100s are the general building requirements, and the 200s are going to be egress primarily, and then 300 series is features of fire protection. The 500 are utilities and electric, HVAC, those type of things, and then some cleanup issues would be, well, they call it building features, but it's like fire drills and the fire evacuation plan and fire doors and resident smoking. And then the last one is at 900s. Now that is all the healthcare facilities book. So if you've ever thought where this all comes from, NFPA 99 is healthcare facilities. And so that's that's the book that all of us, any of us who are certified as healthcare entities, who then have to follow chapters 18 and 19 of NFPA 101, then the healthcare facilities book applies to us. And that's systems issues. It's based on risk. It's a little different guide or book than other life safety books, but we'll talk about that as we get down to the 900 series tags, like things like electrical and oxygen use and those type of things. So leading deficiencies across Pennsylvania, and I just give you guys a clue, and there's a website that CMS posts all of its deficiency information on, and for you all and most across the country, the number one citation in most states is going to be sprinkler system testing, inspection testing, and maintenance, or as I refer to as ITM. And that's because, as you'll see, there's a lot of items that show up into a single K tag 353, which is the catch-all for all the sprinkler quarterlies and annuals and internal inspections and those type of things. And then you'll see in your state generator is the K918, essential electrical, and we'll talk about that. And then hazardous areas, and that's going to be primarily the issue is going to be where you either had an illegal hold open device on a magnetic hold open door or an automatic closer door, where you use a wedge or a coat hanger or duct tape or some crazy thing, or that you have so much COVID or infection control storage like masks and gowns and such that you shove it in a former patient room and you don't have an automatic closure on the door. So it's an inappropriate storage room, which is really common across the country right now because so many of us have so much infection control stuff stored, and there's no place to store it. So then we put it in a room. We don't think about turning that room into a storage area. And fire alarm system, K-tag 345, which can be a number of items, including smoke detector sensitivity, and then just to have fire alarm itself, systems issues. Very common sight this past couple of years since we've kind of restarted survey has been facilities making sure you're doing the semi-annual, having your company come out and do semi-annual visual inspection. K920, this is electrical equipment, power strips, power taps, sometimes they're referred to in the NEC, National Electrical Code. We'll talk about that. And then building construction types in Pennsylvania, I'm assuming, I think this is why. In fact, I'm in New York State this week doing a FSCS. Many of you have facilities that are over 3 stories that may have unprotected steel, and that ends up being a construction issue because that's not permitted. Then you have to do a number of issues related to that. but Pennsylvania, particularly eastern part of the state, well, Pittsburgh area too, have a number of buildings that have this issue. Then corridor doors, remember, every door to the corridor must close and latch. Every door to the corridor must close and latch, regardless of the type of door, whether it's a storage door, closet door, resident room door, office door. And they have to be, certain 1 3/4 inch solid wood core door, or like and similar, could be a metal door, could be a 20-minute fire rated door, has to resist the passage of smoke. But the biggest issue is closing and latching. 372, subdivision of spaces, smoke barriers. This is where you have penetrations. Surveyors are finding penetrations, holes in subdivisions. So you go up in your attic or the space above, I guess, your general area, your building, and you find where the smoke barriers have had holes run through them by HVAC or plumbing or IT individuals, and they're not sealed appropriately. And you have portable fire extinguishers, and then cooking facilities, emergency lighting at exits. This becomes an issue. General requirements for construction issues, that could be, a lot of times that ends up being the separation between the nursing facility and other levels of care, or it's referred to as conforming space. So nursing homes would be called the conforming space. And then the space on the other side of the wall, which typically should only be no less than a 2-hour rated wall, are called non-conforming space. And so the door may be a problem. There may be also barrier issues between those spaces. Stairwells and smoke-proof enclosures. Again, that's where there will be problems with your multi-storied structures and your stairways, smoke-proof. Maybe again, the doors aren't latching to the stairwells. Maybe the doors themselves aren't appropriately labeled as fire doors, et cetera. And then the subdivision of smoke barriers. K374 is actually fire barriers. I need to change that, fix that. It should be crossed down and put fire barriers. So 272 was smoke barriers, and 374 is actually fire barriers. Again, the same thing, penetrations, holes. So it's going to be very similar. There must be a lot of holes in walls or penetrations in smoke and fire walls in Pennsylvania facilities. At least surveyors are finding them. Now, I would tell you that if you're new to your job and you're listening to this, and this is like a speed dating moment, and like 90 minutes in life safety. So the three things that I'll tell you that are the number one in the country now is doors. Doors in general. I don't care if it's a fire door, a smoke door, corridor door, locking doors. So you have 211, 222, 363, and 361 are the four tags that combined the number one issue in America today: doors, openings, penetrations. I mean, that's the ultimate penetration, is a door from one part of your building to the other, whether it's a smoke or fire barrier, it doesn't matter. They have to close, they have to latch, they have to have the pieces and parts all be present, door can't be damaged, etc. So doors is number one deficiency in the country, and Pennsylvania is no different. Sprinklers, number two, as I saw, you have 2/3 of your facility, 2/3 of facilities in Pennsylvania were cited for a sprinkler issue, whether it's your quarterly or internal inspection or 3-year pressure test in the dry system or annual inspection. We'll go through that, but I mean, there's a number of issues that can all tag back to one K tag, which is K tag 353. And then the third issue of ever increasing importance, and it's actually going to probably move up, actually it could be number one very soon, is going to be electrical issues. Generator, guys, is off the hook important, whether it's the wiring for your generator and making sure you have the 3 branches, the life safety, critical, and a mechanical branch, the testing of your generator, weekly visual, monthly exercises, 3-year exercise, etc. Or the other electrical issues, such as receptacles, non-hospital grade receptacle testing, or GFIs that are working or in the right locations, the use of power strips and the extension cords. And then now the PCRE testing, a personal care related electrical equipment testing, which is an annual thing that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But all of these electrical issues combined, let alone then just general electric issues under K511, things like junction boxes being open, wiring being loose, random wiring running across closets and water heaters, and just not being fitted, or electrical devices not being installed correctly, is just taken off as a real focus by state surveyors. So in the end, survey preparation, I know a number of you probably have, matrix care or maintenance care software, or maybe you have TELS. whatever you're using, that's fine. But the reality is that surveyors still expect to see a paper documentation. There's no way for them to get into the electronic record to verify your documentation. So you end up, you need to have a binder. I would tell you it's a 3-inch binder. It should only have one survey cycle in it. Surveyors are part of their training is that they're supposed to only go back 12 months or back to the last annual survey. I would take out all the older documentation. You don't need to be showing surveyors fire drills from 2019 anymore. That's just too old. So I mean, and anything from the teens needs to go. Honestly, if you had survey in February, you should take everything out prior to February and put it in an archive binder and then start filling it going forward, kind of thing. Make sure you have ladders and the flashlight for surveyors. I mean, just so you don't make them wait, because the whole part of this documentation is that if you have it all documented, they're very confident in you being prepared. And so you just want to, try to get them in and out as quickly as possible. I mean, I know you can't, bum rush them out your door, but why make them wait? The more satisfied they are, the more likely they're just gonna believe in you and your building, and that you're on top of things. The first thing that's really come to light in the past several months, or maybe a couple of years since we've had a new survey, kind of restart the survey since the pandemic, is that the drawings for our buildings, the survey agencies are really pressing today to have a drawing that's referred to as life safety floor plan. So for instance, it's not just good enough to take a basic floor plan of your building and have some squares on it that represent patient rooms and offices and maybe the dining room, but all those have to be labeled. And then a life safety drawing is things like showing the surveyor where your pull stations are, where your vertical openings are, where your fire extinguishers are, where all your smoke and fire barriers are located. One of the most critical aspects of this whole process would be making sure that you identified your fire walls and or your smoke walls in your building. As you know, surveyors will go to those barriers or those walls and then have you look above the drop ceiling typically to then find your penetrations, which, as I showed you in Pennsylvania, is both leading citations. So you want to make sure those barriers are identified, and you have to make sure you know where they are. I've seen a number of questions by surveyors across the country asking, do you really know where your barriers are? Is this a smoke or fire barrier? In some cases, they're nothing. Like yesterday, I was in a building and I got to a set of double doors, and I'm like, oh, it looks like some double doors. They're labeled as smoke doors, and then I get that. But then maintenance says, Ken, these aren't even on. And then the reason they weren't on the drawing as a barrier is that they have no wall above them. So I'm like, oh, I'm glad you know that, because there are buildings that don't know that. So you need to know where your barriers are, making sure you identify those for the survey and on the drawing itself. I mean, like this drawing is a really simple drawing. And I put P's and E's for pull stations and fire extinguishers. And then you'll see I didn't do a good job on this one of showing where I said where the fire doors are. I really need to update this and show where the fire walls are. Obviously, the walls are part of continuous along with where those fire doors are, but I do identify the 3 zones of the building and making sure that, the surveyor would be able to understand where different parts of the facility are, and all the room numbers are identifiable as well. Just having a clear drawing is going to be important for surveys going forward. And then the other thing is really important for those of you who are listening, whether you're maintenance, whether you're, administration, quality staff, is that you need to make sure that you're reading and reviewing all the documentation you are getting from vendors, whether it's sprinkler, fire extinguisher, range hood, whatever you're using a vendor to do rather than you doing yourself. Please make sure you review that to make sure that, it is completed. Any work that they've asked for or requested or require you to do, you need to make sure it's done to close the loop on that inspection, testing, and maintenance document. Otherwise, if it's not done, the surveyors will find you in non-compliance because you did not follow up on any repairs or recommendations. Let's see, just so Kim, I don't know if you saw this question. Christina asked, will the slides be available? So I don't know, I assume they are, Christina,
Yep.
and I'll find out. Oh, okay.
Yep,
Perfect.
those are going to be available as always, as well as the recording from today's presentation.
Great. If not, guys, I mean, I should say my first slide and my last slide have my email contact. You can always ask me questions after the fact. After we have our Q&A at the end of this today, we can always have questions. You can send me questions in the future. The next 5 slides, guys, is your basics of your documentation. Now, each of these bullet points in my world are actually tabs of my Life Safety Code documentation binder that I work on with facilities. So the first one, as I said, is the facility layout. Second one would be Life Safety Code waivers, or the FSCS. If you do have a fire safety evaluation or waivers, you would want to include that, making sure, make sure you have that documentation. Surveyor should have that already also, but make sure that, all things are equal to have that. And then I would really encourage you to have a building occupancy permit. Each of you is in a county. Your building permit is from your Department of Commerce. And it describes, there's some information on there, such as your building type and your construction type, because then it relates to NFPA 220, the construction type of your building. As I said before, KTAG 161 is a really leading site in Pennsylvania. A lot of those end up being where your building construction type that you were built at, maybe type 2 non-combustible 111 or 222 building, has been downgraded to type 2000. So you're in kind of a conflict between your state building authority and CMS, and how that plays out is very interesting. And you may end up having to get what's called a continuing waiver. And then a local fire inspections. Some of you probably have townships or fire marshals come out and do a separate inspection, making sure you obviously correct all of their violations as well. State surveyor agencies typically have access to or share those. And so you want to make sure you've corrected those things, but also they should be in your binder as well. And then separate chapter for policies, whether it's fire watch policies or generator failure policy or policy on the non-use of space heaters. By the way, space heaters should never be used in a nursing home, period. Or it could be generator failure, elevator failure policy. It could be your fire evacuation policy, just your policies. Again, you don't want to be gathering policies during survey. You don't want to be struggling to find the right policy in your building. So you have that present. And then in services as well, whether you do you have to do a KTAG 926 requires us to do an oxygen safety in service. And so that's, oxygen handling, medical gas handling safety in service. You have your annual fire disaster preparation in service. In some places, the fire marshal or local fire authority might come in and do an in-service as well. Again, you'd have all these agendas and sign-in sheets there, again, rather than trying to find from your in-service coordinator in services that surveyors may ask about. And then, like every state, boilers and elevators do have certificates from state agency. So again, you want to have just a copy of those, making sure that those things are current in your building, that you're up to date. And then you have your monthly exit sign auditing. Exit signs should be audited every month to make sure that they are not damaged, they're in place, and that they're working. And then you have, of course, you have emergency lighting and emergency battery operated lighting. And I know in your top 10 was KTAG 291, which is actually, when it says emergency lighting, it's the one with the battery in them. And so I think the most common citation is that where you as maintenance are not testing those on the correct frequency, which is once a month, you push the button in on the side and you make sure that it's operating for 30 seconds under battery power. And then once a year, you have to test it for 90 minutes. You may have to push it or duct tape it down for 90 minutes to make sure it's working. So you have that documentation and all of your battery operated devices. So the one, most of you may have these on the generator, so that's separate. Then we'll talk about at 281 in a second. But at 291, you would any battery operated device, and we have at least one of them, the transfer switch. So if your transfer switch or generator are inside your building, one or both, you're supposed to have no less than one of these battery operated emergency lighting devices at the transfer switch inside the room. And so again, you're testing that. So some of you may only have one of these. Some of you may have these throughout the building, at exits and different places in the corridors. No matter how many devices you have that have a battery in them, you have to test them once a month for 30 seconds or 90 minutes annually. And then emergency exit lighting is kind of overlaps on this. You also have to have no less than 90 minutes of emergency exit lighting at every exit. And so when the generator is running under load, so that's once a month when you're running your generator on the generator power, not pole power, you should go outside and walk around your building and make sure you have two sources of light, two light bulbs burning at all times. I don't care if it's middle of July and it's sunny. I don't care if it's middle of the night in January. If your emergency lighting is on the generator, it has to burn when the generator is running under load. I was in a building outside Pittsburgh a couple summers ago. We ran this test for the maintenance, and so we found that 13 of 14 light bulbs were burned down. So again, you need to make sure that, again, you have two fixtures with one light bulb each, or one fixture with two light bulbs, but they can't be on an on and off switch. It can't be on a light meter switch or a sun meter switch. It has to burn, period, when the generator is running. If your emergency lighting is on the generator. Let's see. The next thing, of course, for egress doors is, magnetic hold open devices. Again, many places the surveyor will have you pull the fire alarm during survey. What they're looking for is to make sure your magnetic hold open device is released during that fire alarm sound initiation. And then the biggest citation lately has been where the magnetic hold open devices do release the door, but the door does not actually latch into the frame. So you quarterly check during a fire drill, you would check to make sure all your doors are closing and latching into the frame that are being held open by magnetic hold open devices. And then you have delayed egress doors and locking doors. Again, during the fire alarm initiation, you make sure that these are all being unlocked so they completely stop functioning. But this is where the doors are permitted to slow someone down. Egress is, of course, the most basic operation, or the most basic fundamental of the code is to get out of a building, period. So this is permitting, because of psychiatric needs or the cognitive loss needs of your residents, that you are permitted to slow down the egress slightly based on a number of circumstances. But you got to make sure those doors function appropriately, and that's going to be under K tag 222. And then corridor smoke doors, again, the construction of those doors has to be solid wood core doors, or 20-minute fire rated doors can substitute for that. They can be a little skinnier, but they have to close and latch. Again, latching is the critical element there. Then there's fire door testing. So doors in your building that are rated for fire doors that are going to be 45 minutes or 90 minutes, or in some cases, you may even have a 3-hour door. All those doors have to have an annual fire door inspection, which I believe is 11 required elements that have to pass a basic inspection. And then you have your elevator. Now, most of your quarterly and annual inspection by elevator are done by a contractor, but you have the monthly fireman recall testing. This has come up now. I mean, most states are enforcing this now, that you have to go in with the key, turn that key, and you have to make sure that elevator recalls back to the floor of egress each month. So you have to have documentation of that elevator recall. And then there's nothing, I know tomorrow is a big day. We should all get a cake and celebrate the end of the public health emergency and sort of the end of COVID as we know it. Now cases today in COVID are now lower today than they were in March of 2020. So that's good to know. There's nothing related to COVID in the Life Safety Code 2012 edition. They didn't even imagine it back then. But states are enforcing HVAC to make sure it's working efficiently and effectively as best as possible. And so you need to follow your manufacturer recommendations for probably most likely an annual preventative maintenance, having it make sure that all the pieces and parts are working and the belts and hoses are all good. And so you do a preventative maintenance annually. And then the subsequent is that you are documenting that you're changing the furnace filters or cleaning them, or the PTAC filters, you're cleaning that according to manufacturer specs. So most manufacturers will recommend, monthly or quarterly cleaning or replacement, and that you're documenting that as well. And then a hot topic, of course, is smoke and fire dampers. I've seen it a couple places, most cited at 520, K tag 521. You need to know what you have, of course. Do you have a fire or smoke damper? It's going to be important to know. And then from that, you're going to have to make sure you inspect, test, and maintain it, clean it. And then the fusible link in a fire damper, have to show documentation. You either replaced it or cleaned it. So that's every 4 years for skilled nursing facilities that you are getting your dampers inspected, tested, and maintained. This whole slide is on sprinkler. There's so much on sprinkler inspection, testing, and maintenance. As I said, it's the leading number single citation in the country, KTAG 353. As you see, every single one of these items on this slide, actually compliance goes back to KTAG 353. So you have your sprinkler system, you have 4 quarterly inspections every 90 days. Somebody comes out from your contract company and inspects your system. Most of the 3 quarterlies are going to be mostly visual, and then 1 is going to be listed as an annual inspection, where it's going to be more functionally tested, the high flow water at that point, et cetera. But you have these 4 quarterlies. If you're curious and if you're sitting in a building, you don't even know if you've had these, when you get done with this, go down to your riser room. So you need to know where your riser room is, and then look at the card. The sprinkler system riser room, the sprinkler system itself has a card hanging on it from your vendor, and they will sign and date that card. And hopefully it's every 90 days, roughly. Every 90 days, there's no grace period. So you really can't go 100 days and think you're okay. It is what it is, if it is 100 days. But no, roughly every 90 days, so you can see the dates they've come, period. And then of course you have your wet system gauges. When you're in your riser room, you'll see all kinds of water and air pressure gauges. You need to report those pressures once a month. And then if you have a dry system, again, you need to know your building. You need to know what kind of systems you have. If you have a dry sprinkler system, one of the biggest changes between the dry and wet system. I mean, obviously there's no water in your pipes, hopefully, but the other thing is that you'll have an air compressor in your riser room. So having an air compressor would be a real telltale sign of having a dry system. But again, you have to record those pressure, air and water pressure, air pressure, once every week. And then your spare sprinkler inventory, one your sprinkler company should give you under NFPA 25. We're required to have an inventory of all the heads of our building, all the types that we're using in our facility, and the number of those heads, types of heads, and the number of those heads. And so once you have your number of heads, then that drives the types of spares that you have and the number of spares that you have in your building. And I'm just recommending that you either quarterly or annually confirm your spares are being stored appropriately, that the wrench is still in the red box that goes with the spares, that your spares are in good shape. And then from the floor, you have an annual inspection that you can do. This is probably the only thing on this slide that you can do yourself. You as maintenance can inspect all of yours, probably to inspect every head in the building by room, indicating that they're all clean, they're not corroded, they're not leaking, they're not damaged, they don't have any overspray, etc. They appear to be working and appear to be correct. And then once every 5 years, you have an internal inspection. Once every 3 years on a dry system, you have a pressure testing, annual backflow testing. Every sprinkler system is required to have a backflow device on it to ensure that the sprinkler water would not back into your domestic system. And that testing is done on an annual basis. If you are a facility that has antifreeze in your wet sprinkler system to ensure that it does not freeze, then that testing is done annually. That'd be specific gravity. That's the percentage of propylene glycol or glycerin in your system, and the specific gravity or the specific temperature that your system would be rated to. Most of Pennsylvania is between -0 or -5 to -20. Should be rated to that. And then there's a map, and then you would be able to see what your facility should be rated to, which is really corresponds with the minimum low temperature that your facility is going to experience on an annual basis. Even though this year probably wasn't very cold, except for like right around Christmas time. And then a standpipe, if you have, a standpipe, which for some of you would know what that is, but you might know what FDC. If you have an FDC sign on the outside of your building, that's called a fire department connection. That's a standpipe. Standpipe is where a pumper truck could hook to your sprinkler system and add more water to your system. For whatever reason, they added that to your sprinkler system to add volume. Testing is done every 5 years. There's a hydrostatic pressure test that is done every 5 years on FDC connections. Following that, a couple more things on sprinklers. Some of you may have a fire pump system. Fire pumps, again, are systems that provide volume and pressure to areas that do not have that provided by your city, your township, or your water department. And so you have the weekly visual inspection of your fire pump. You have the fire pump testing. Electric is monthly, diesel is weekly. And then you have an annual fire pump inspection, testing, and maintenance done by again, a company would come and do that fire pump inspection, testing, and maintenance. So there's a fair amount of oversight of fire pumps. Kitchen range hood has not changed. It's still every 6 months you have your kitchen range hood inspected, tested, and maintained. And that's again a tag system like your riser room for your sprinkler system. It's another extinguishing system that is tagged and is done every 6 months. And then your range hood cleaning, which is also no less than every 6 months, which is your range hood from the hood going up through the roof is cleaned down to the bare metal. No less than every 6 months, removing all that grease-laden vapors or grease that has attached itself to the metal. And then you have fire alarm, KTEG 345. Actually, it can be it starts at really KTEG 341, but I see mostly 345 used as a citation for semi-annual and the annual functional test. You also frequently have your sensitivity testing is most of this is every 2 years at this point. And so you have to have that sensitivity, detector sensitivity done. And I said the semi-annual test has been the test that has gotten most of us in problems or most of us in trouble or not having done. Annual fire extinguisher PM, and then of course your monthly check off of the devices is the next thing. Fire drills, 1 per month, per shift, per quarter, to 12 fire drills a year, varied times under varied conditions, varying the times no less than 1 hour apart. I know in Pennsylvania you also have your annual fire drill monitoring or audit by an outside contractor or fire official to ensure that your staff is well prepared to do that or are doing it correctly. Fire hydrants, some of you may have to do your own fire hydrants, which the fire hydrant testing is a clear flow test, and then the smoke fire barrier inspection. So again, this is one I recommend doing, again, because it's a leading citation in Pennsylvania, 271 or 374. There were a lot of penetrations or holes left in your barriers. And so making sure that these are corrected and corrected appropriately with the correct, caulking material, with, using the correct and done correctly. So the one thing you have to be very, very leery of, and I usually just say, don't do it. But the issue of using a spray foam product is really problematic. Now you're not in my region, so you're not in the region of CMS region 5, you're in region 3. It may be a little bit more permissible as long as you have the contents, the paperwork showing that they're appropriately certified product. But most CMS regional offices and many state agencies just simply don't permit the use of the spray foam products. For whatever reason, they just don't feel that they're appropriate. So if you are using a spray foam product or any product, you need to be able to keep a copy of that documentation when questioned. And then you have electrical maintenance, again, wiring, and there's all kinds of issues of wiring and junction boxes being capped off, and just all of that documentation that's going to be important. Then you have ground fault. There's GFIs, making sure that they are inspected, tested, and maintained. I'm just recommending quarterly. A lot of surveyors in this country today walk around with a GFI tester in their hand, and if they see one while they tour your building during survey, they test it just themselves, and they find a lot of GFIs that are not working, or they're not in the right. Also, sometimes they find they're not in the right locations. Typically within 6 feet of a water source, you are required to have a GFI protected receptacle. And then with the addition of the code, we added this non-hospital grade receptacles. Again, you test that once a year. You're testing integrity, polarity, neutral, and the retention force, the ability to pull that device out. And that's supposed to be no less than 4 ounces. And then you have PCREE, which is personal care related. Electrical equipment needs to be tested on an annual basis. Well, that's things like your electric bed, the nurse on a stick, with your pulse ox, your temperature, that thing on a pole, anything electric that's used for care on and around a resident requires to be tested once a year for things like line leakage and touch current and that kind of thing. And then generator is a huge focus today on generators. Again, CMS really sees generators. I think honestly, they're angry that we don't all have them. There are buildings in this country that don't have generators. It's not required, but they do recognize the need for electricity is paramount, and for health safety, it's paramount. So the annual PM has to be done. You have your weekly visual inspection of the generator. You have your monthly exercise under load, taking your building from pole power to generator power. If you're a diesel generator, you are permitted to use the load bank test as an alternate form of compliance if your diesel generator is not running 30% of its nameplate rating. Once every 3 years, you do a 4-hour loaded exercise. So it's the same as the monthly exercise, just happens every 4 hours under load. And then diesel fuel testing for generators. If you have a diesel generator, you're supposed to have diesel fuel tested once a year to make sure its content of water and sulfur and dirt is within acceptable limits. They have a passing test of that. And of course, if you have a natural gas generator, states, including Pennsylvania, I believe, do allow natural gas generator owners to get a fuel reliability letter from your natural gas provider, showing that the fuel is reliable, natural gas is reliable, and that you will be uninterrupted, signed by a scientist. But this is in lieu of having to put a secondary form of fuel in, which most of the times natural gas generators, you will put in a propane tank. There have been these situations in some states to put propane tanks in to back up your generator's fuel source, so that if your natural gas would fail, propane in the fitting is very similar. So it burns very similar. So it works quite well. But this is so you don't have to do that. Some of you may have done this, but it's not necessarily required. So let's talk about some of the specific items in the 100 series, and then we're going to go through some of the K tags. I know I have about 45 minutes. We'll talk about things. And of course, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them. So the 100 series, as I said before, is building construction and renovation. The number one issue, and then I know many of you would have this, where you have your nursing facility, again, conforming space is separate from, personal care homes, or maybe called assisted living, residential care, independent living, or other types, even office space. So it's separated by a 2-hour wall. And then within that 2-hour wall, hopefully you don't have any penetrations. You have to seal those appropriately, but then you have a 90-minute door, which has to be inspected, tested, and maintained. Of course, it has to close and latch, has to have positive latching hardware. Every once in a while I see where the door does not have that. And there's the issue of gaps, undercut, all of that. But that's really the most common K161. And then, of course, for you all in Pennsylvania, those are multi-story structures that ends up being the steel, girders, rolled steel, the beams, all that is unprotected from fireproofing, which then downgrades your construction type to type 2000, which ends up, being a serious problem for facilities. But this is the really common 2-hour firewall issue. I think the other one, of course, is going to be issue of storage. You are permitted to convert a patient room to, storage. We're going to show here office storage, but many of you maybe have low census and converted a patient room into infection control storage for your gowns and masks and eye shields and sanitizer. Sanitizer, by the way, cannot have more than 10 gallons of sanitizer in a compartment. So I have seen a number of sites where you may have several dozen cases of sanitizer, which way exceeds a 10-gallon, and surveyors have been citing that. But you are permitted to have an automatic closer added to that door of this patient room and turn it into storage. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to guarantee that the walls are under 1 hour rated, and you don't have to put a 45-minute door on. You only have to add an automatic closer to that door. In existing nursing homes, since we were fully sprinkled, we do get a little bit of benefit there. The 200 series, again, as I said earlier, is all about egress, getting out. I mean, just get out of the building, means of egress. So it's, the corridors, the exit access, the pathways, even the parking lot to the right of way, all that is in play, though I've never really seen a parking lot, cited itself. Sidewalks, absolutely. But so there's a number of issues, of course, again, the corridor. So when you leave a patient room, that corridor down the hallway to the exit, to the exit access, to the pathway, all of that has to be clear and ready for instant use at all times, period. Simple as that. Because you never know when there's going to be an emergency and you have to egress. And again, egress is the fundamental backbone of the code. So getting out. And so That's why we worry about corridor clutter. That's why we're going to worry about exits. That's why we worry about exits not being blocked. That's why we worry about the sidewalk. Of course, the very first thing, of course, moving kind of backwards too, is the fundamental building aspect, or kind of the code looks for is all about defend in place and compartmentalization. But the most basic concept of defend in place is that in a patient room, the door shuts and latches. Again, I've said this a couple of times, doors have to be 1 3/4 inch solid bonding wood core. I mean, I was at a building last week, and most of the doors in the corridor were hollow. I mean, were hollow doors. In fact, one of the ways I verified this is that I was in a storage room, and the back of the storage room door was gone. I mean, it was somehow, somebody beat it in, left a hole, and I could see that it's hollow to the other side. So hollow doors are not permitted on corridor doors. They have to resist the passage of smoke for no less than 20 minutes. And so that ends up, being the gap on the door. Now for the gaps, by the way, it's a 1/2 inch all the way around, an inch at the bottom. There is a QSO notice back from 2007 that says in a fully sprinkled building, you are allowed 1/2 inch gap to resist the passage of smoke, which you and I probably both agree that 1/2 inch is pretty big when you talk about smoke. But being that we are fully sprinkled, it provides a lot of protection. And it would reduce the amount of smoke that was going to be generated. So that must be the thinking of CMS, and that continues today. But the biggest issue, again, is closing and latching. That door is resisting passive smoke only if it closes and latches. Now, delayed egress doors, again, locking doors. This delayed egress, the most common one is a 15 seconds, sometimes it's 30 seconds, 15-second delayed egress door. The most basic requirement is that door must be labeled appropriately with that signage, push until alarm sounds. Door can be opened in 15 seconds, must be on the door, relatively in the middle of that door. That picture I have is probably a little bit high for that label. It can come down. There is no code requirement for the level. It just has to be on the door, has to be of high contrast. So, it just needs to be there. And then, of course, the function of the door is where you would actually push on that panic bar for 3 seconds or less. And then you would hear that audible alarm sound, which then has initiated the unlocking process, which then, even with pressure off the panic bar, the door will open in 12 seconds after that 3 seconds. So roughly in the whole operation takes 15 seconds or less. And of course, the doors lose this function altogether with the loss of power, the initiation of the sprinkler or fire alarm system. So, and as I showed you guys, that's a very common sight here in Pennsylvania. Corridor width, of course, again, corridors, clear corridors, I don't want anything in the corridors. There should be nothing in there, but they do permit, lift equipment and wheelchairs or transportation equipment, as long as you never block enough to leave. You have to leave at least 60 inches. So that's why it's really important to know your corridor widths, because some of you probably don't have wide enough corridors to store stuff in. But you cannot store things in there that blocks and leaves less than 60 inches or 5 feet across your hallway. So again, in use, of course, med carts and linen carts and housekeeping carts and trash receptacles and all those things in use, mechanical carts, all that in use is fine, as long as it's moving along and you're delivering or picking up or whatever. Those can't be stored in the corridor. It cannot be left for hours. They cannot be stored or have storage in them in the corridor. And then in addition, you can't have stuff in them in corridors themselves, like couches and magazine racks and bookcases, and fish tanks and bird cages and just all that crap people put in corridors. It's just not appropriate. Again, corridors are about getting out. And in some cases, I guess we also would be thinking about rescuers coming in, first responders. So either way, the point is they have to be clear and ready for instant use at all times. And all this stuff in the corridors it's just inappropriate. Fire door inspection. So in addition to corridor doors, and of course there's fire doors, you need to know where your fire doors are located. We've been doing fire door inspections since January 2018. Fire doors are typically, those are rated 45 minutes, 90 minutes. In some cases, you might have a 3-hour barrier and a 3-hour door. And you're inspecting, testing, and maintaining these doors on an annual basis using a specific tool. And I can certainly send it to you. Created one for AHCA back in 2016. And it's a tool that you would inspect each door. And then the most important aspect is that you find all these doors in your building. I mean, you have to locate the doors in your building that are fire rated doors, and then you inspect those doors based on the annual inspection criteria. Moving to the 300 series, you have, of course, the most basic is going to be the inspection, testing, and maintenance of your sprinkler system. Sprinkler systems, again, are going to be done. All that ITM is done under NFPA 25. And so, and then most of that is going to be done by a contractor. You're required to maintain it, make sure it's not damaged, make sure it's maintained at 40 degrees. There is a requirement that we maintain our sprinkler systems at 40 degrees or higher at all times. And then we have to have, an individual or vendor contracts to come in and inspect, test, and maintain it according to the code. We have automatic sprinkler systems, quarterly and annual inspections. Again, every 90 days, you have your sprinkler company come in and do their thing. You would have the internal inspection every 5 years. Again, it's in looking for material, water buildup, and or rust, dirt, corrosion, or microbiologically induced corrosion, which is called MIC. And then you would have a dry system test. If you have a dry system, you have a pressure test. They kind of pump your system up to 40 pounds, turn off the compressor, and see what happens over the next couple of hours. If you lose more than 3 pounds of pressure, you're non-compliant. You need to be looking for pinholes. Backflow testing, as I said earlier, is done annually. Every sprinkler system does have at least one, if not more, backflow devices that are tested. And then antifreeze testing, where it's used, is tested on an annual basis. Again, it must be done by a qualified individual. One of the things that you also I want you to be doing, because it's required, is that you need to be documenting your annual inspection. So, for instance, that picture on the top there, dirty heads. You need to be looking for all the heads that have dirt, grime, buildup, rust, corrosion. That's on the head itself, or even the escutcheon around it. Any kind of movement of the head, up, down. Any gap between the head, the escutcheon, and the ceiling is inappropriate. And then, of course, the other picture there is where wires are running across sprinkler pipe. You can never touch sprinkler pipe. Never. The other day, I was at another building, and they literally had zip tied. So you see all those wires there running across. Well, this building went to the effort of actually zip tying them to the sprinkler pipe. So it's actually even a worse picture. So you're making sure that, you're checking these sprinkler heads and the bracing to make sure that they're all not being used, but they're all in good working order, appears to be in good working order once a year. Your fire watch policies. Now, this has been a huge issue. Some of you may have been on fire watch. There was, we had that cold wave, December 23rd in Ohio, that I'm sure affected many of you, some of you, I would expect. And it was amazing because we went from, the temperatures were in the low 40s around midnight, and literally 3-4 hours later, it was -6 to -10. And so your attics, your spaces, we had all kinds of buildings that have all kinds of problems. So many of you may have gone on Firewatch. Now, Firewatch for your fire alarm system is KTAG 346, and your Firewatch for your sprinkler system, is 354. Now, either way, the Firewatch is where the individual doing the fire watch, the fire watcher, is doing nothing else but the fire watch. So they have a singular job of doing nothing but fire watch. And they're continuously patrolling your building, ensuring that there's no fire breaking out, and that they have had some training and testing. And that training would be like, do you know what fire looks like? Do you know what fire is? Do you know how to call 911? Do you know how to use a cell phone? Do you know how to carry a fire extinguisher? Do you know how to walk around a building? So you're giving them some basic instruction, and then they have no other duties, but they're just a human fire alarm watching for fire. Now, fire watch for a fire alarm being out starts no less than 4 hours after it's been out. And then for a sprinkler, it's 10 hours. That the 10-hour was really allowing sprinkler companies to come in and do work on your sprinkler system, replacing pipe, which is very common, which can take all day, but then they are not requiring you to be on fire watch when work is being done. So the 10-hour mark. So that's why your policy is slightly different. Same concept, fire watch either way. And you have notifications of the fire watch happening between your locals, your state fire department, your liability insurance company, and that type of thing. 3-year pressure test, again, making sure you're getting that documented by your company. Pump it up 40 pounds, 2 hours. You lose more than 3 pounds in 2 hours, you have to begin then finding pinhole leaks and have it retested. Again, testing maintenance is always a passing test. So if you fail a test, that doesn't count. You actually have to, fix whatever, and then you have it retested to make sure it's working. This is that 5-year internal inspection. National Fire Alarm Code, which is going to be NFPA 72. Again, there's an entire book on this stuff. Again, most of you use a qualified inspection, testing, and maintenance company. Again, fire alarm companies are licensed by the state of Pennsylvania to do your fire alarm testing. I would never, there's not a number of things I would never touch. And maybe it's because of liability, but I wouldn't do fire extinguishers. I don't touch my elevator. I don't touch my sprinkler system, and I don't touch my fire alarm. So, basically, including changing the batteries inside the fire alarm. The other day, we were talking about this with a group. I guess I was in Oklahoma, and the guy's like, well, I have my batteries. I replaced my batteries last week and tied my fire alarm because they were more than, 4 years old. I said, oh, God, no. Call your company, have them take those, have them replace your batteries and take those home or get your money back, whatever. Because you really shouldn't. I mean, you really should not. You really cannot touch any aspect of your fire alarm system. Because you're not qualified, because you're either not factory tested or trained, and or you're not licensed by Pennsylvania to do so. Your fire alarm, of course, involves all kinds of pieces and parts. It's a very large, intricate system. And again, it has air sampling, it has fire or heat detectors. It can have smoke detectors, horns and strobes and pull stations. And then, of course, you have a lot of communication pieces and parts. So all of these are visually inspected on a semi-annual basis. And then each one of these items is going to be functionally tested on an annual basis. So the visual inspection, of course, starts at the fire panel, and then would run to every single one of your devices in your building, whether it's fire alarm panel itself, to the smoke detectors, pull stations, to the dialing system, because obviously, most of you know you have to have 2 dialing systems out. That's why we call it a monitored fire alarm system. Now, many of you, including my own building, has one of those dialers is now a cellular connection, so that basically cellular connection is maintained at all times to send a signal if necessary. But the idea is that you go through they look at the whole system, and this, of course, would be the most basic. Would be make sure that there's the system's normal. I mean, I would just tell you to go look at your system and make sure it's normal operating. There's no fault or supervisory signals. Once you have any kind of signals on that, you must repair those. Must act immediately to fix that. I mean, that's like your internal QA process. And if you see one of those faults or supervisory, you have to get that fixed. Absolutely post haste. That's just required to react quickly. And then annual testing, of course, is where every single device is tested, functionally tested annually. And all of this is documented individually, guys. So I mean, it's not like you get a receipt from a Happy Shady Pines fire alarm company that says, I came in and did everything in your building, $2,000. No, because first of all, invoices are not documentation of testing. And 2, you have to do every single device individually. So many of you know that your fire alarm report could be 10, 12 pages long because they list every smoke detector, every heat detector, every pull station, etc. And then they show the functional testing. Functional testing is different than sensitivity testing. Functional testing is basically pushing the button or making it go off, making sure that the alarm or the function itself is appropriate. So and is working according to the way it was designed, engineered, and then installed at your building. And then smoke detector sensitivity testing is where every 2 years, the first year after installation, but most of us are in a two-year cycle now. So every 2 years, you have every smoke detector in your building sensitivity tested, and that's sensitivity to parts per million of smoke. And so you can't use magnets. The magnetic test is not appropriate. So this is that cone test where they take a cone of smoke and they smoke your device. Now, one of the most important aspects, let me make sure. Yeah, one of the most important aspects of the documentation is that your smoke detector sensitivity lists, the model and the model number, the device, location of the device, and then the listed range for passing. So let's say the device is, the Amex 100 series, and it's, in the corridor by the front door, and the listed range is 0 to 4. And that's when it says 0 to 4, that's probably parts per million. And so then when they smoke it, they actually come up with smoke and they do this, then it should have a number. It should be a number of parts per million like 2.86 or 1.44 or 9.77, whatever it is, what made the device initiate. So if it was 0 to 4 is the expected range, obviously 9 is too high, and 0 would, or let's say 0.5 would be too low. So either over or under sensitivity, and that doesn't pass. So then you have to either recalibrate it, clean it, or replace it. I would tell you, some of you listening, I would tell you that I would go back to look at your sensitivity report you had done recently, the most recent one. And I would tell you, some of you have the same number of sensitivity for every one of your devices in your building. And I have a serious problem with that. I don't think you got what you paid for. Pretty sure you did not, because it's impossible to have like 50 or 60 or 80 smoke detectors in your building, and they're all 1.6 or 2.4 parts per million. That is absolutely impossible. It's million parts of smoke. So no, they should be different numbers for every different device, because every device has a different sensitivity. Even though they're all listed in the same possible range, they're always going to be different. Hazardous spaces is a basement that I am building in. And of course, what you can't see in this picture is that just to the right of this picture is open gas cans in this facility. So that was what my issue was. Just was like the biggest mess I ever saw in a building. But again, hazardous spaces are again, it's not hazard. I mean, it's not necessarily like a hazard, like you would think like gasoline. Gasoline is called a high hazard, and gasoline can never be stored inside a nursing home unless it's in a 2-hour rated cabinet. But a hazardous space is a space, whether it's a room, let's say hazardous room, where the load of that room, in every building, there's an expected load of combustible material. So, there's how much expected from the bed, the overbed table, dresser, or maybe a desk and a chair in an office, whatever. There's an expected load. And so a hazardous room or a hazardous space is where the load is of combustible material is greater than the expected. And so this is where you end up, having a space that, then requires the door needs to be at least kept shut and latched at all times. That's why you have an automatic closer. Sometimes you guys use the spring-loaded hinges. Either way, it's fine. But the door remains closed, and if I pass through that door, it closes behind me. And those are the doors that, in most cases, are permitted to actually have a magnetic hold open device to hold it open. And again, it closes when the initiation of smoke alarm or the fire alarm, whatever. So again, it closes. So the expectation, they want that door closed because the hazard is there. So it's for storage of stuff. And so as I said, I showed you guys earlier your leading tags, but K-tag 321 is where either are inappropriately holding it open with a wedge, plastic or wood, or, and of course, what's worse, you shove a washcloth in the lock set so the door doesn't latch, or I've seen duct tape and wires and hangers and just, whatever. Holding the door open inappropriately will get you in a lot of trouble as well. But it's just the load of that room is pretty high. Now, of course, generally hazardous spaces, again, I'm always amazed at like laundry rooms. And I know Pennsylvania, you guys have that personal laundry on each unit. Those spaces have doors. I would just put an automatic closer on it. Whether it's over 100 square feet or not is debatable. But you have equipment in there. And then it comes to any room that has medical gas storage room, water heaters, mechanicals, those type of things. And then as it says there, there really is no hard and fast rule on hazardous spaces. There's really it's in the eyes of the AHJ, the authority having jurisdiction. So again, rooms that are 50 square feet or bigger, the size doesn't really matter. I've seen rooms smaller than this, but have a ton of storage, whether it's infection control storage or as I say, or nursing supplies or medical supplies and therapy equipment, and how many mattresses can you squeeze into a room. Again, I could be teaching nursing administrators how to hoard. We hoard so much crap, whether it's broken wheelchairs and mattresses and a box of anything we've ever ordered that we didn't use. That's all becomes potentially hazardous material. So again, the closer, hold open devices become the two most common issues that we have to address. Fire extinguishers, again, you have fire extinguishers throughout your corridors. They should be within 75 feet of each other throughout the corridors. In America, we use the ABC type extinguisher, which is very common. And then, of course, in the kitchens where there's a potential grease fire, you'd use what's called a K type extinguisher, which has the contents would be appropriate for grease fires. And that's must be 30 feet. So everybody's within 30 feet of a K-type extinguisher. So sometimes I see where the K-type extinguisher might be, you might need a second one in the kitchen. Some of your kitchens are pretty large, and 30 feet is not as far as you think. That's all under, NFPA 1, NFPA 10, and then the monthly, you're hefting that, you're like taking it off the wall, you're picking it up, you're shaking it, you're kind of feeling the contents, you're making sure that the tag is present. You're also making sure that the needle is in the little green, the pie-shaped green space on the meter reading. And then for the K-type extinguisher, that sign there, that red sign, warning sign is present above the K-type extinguisher is going to be important as well. Get your range hood at 324. Again, every 6 months, you're having to come in, they're checking the pendants, they're checking the caps, they're going to make sure that everything is in working order, that the device is a UL 300 series device that is full and is ready to go, and all of that. And if there's any fusible links there, probably replaced at the same time. And as I said earlier, that also maybe the same company, it could be two different companies, but you're having somebody come in and clean your range hood, going from the exhaust fan going up, all the way up through the canopy, all the way up through your roof, making sure that the metal itself is cleaned down to the metal. No less than every 6 months. So if you have a lot of deep frying or a lot of grease-laden vapors, there are buildings across the country that do it more frequently than every 6 months, but no less than every 6 months. Now, these are the two things that have been the number 1 and 2 sites in the kitchen in this past couple of years. Is you see the pictures on the left there, the center picture and the left picture is where the wheels are actually referred to as being chalked. Of course, this is taped. That's that Gorilla Black tape, which sticks to a kitchen floor really nicely, where you mark the floor. So any wheeled kitchen equipment that could be moved out, the wheels are marked so that they go back to the exact location under the range hood. Because if you go back, you look at this picture here, everything under the range hood is an engineered and it's actually stamped plans. And so you want to make sure that now, of course, the picture here shows the pendants in a certain location, but it doesn't show wheeled. It shows the pegged feet. So then you don't have to chalk the pegged feet because you can't move it to clean it very easily. But the whole idea is that if you have wheels, then you want to put it back in the right location. Now, on the right side, I have the tether there, but I mean, you have a chain, but you also have to tether or chain the gas-fired equipment, stove, oven, to the wall or floor, so that when you do roll it out, that the gas line itself can't be damaged or severed. And so this is a protection. So those are very common K324 sites in this country right now. And so making sure your kitchen is compliant is going to be important. Building services, this is 5, and then there's an elevator shows up here. You have HVAC equipment, of course, is the first one. And as I said earlier, making sure you're doing your filter changes according to manufacturer, making sure you are getting your annual PM. Now, I say most of you have annual PMs required because most of your manufacturers expect you to annually inspect, test, and maintain your furnaces. And so you have documentation on your furnaces being maintained appropriately, as well as your filters. And then, of course, subsequent to that, whether it's KTAG 521 or KTAG 511, is that you have your dampers are inspected. Now, dampers are inspected 1 year after installation, and then every 4 years after that. And again, every 4 years, they're cleaned. So they're cleaned, they're oiled, they're lubed, they make sure they fully close and latch. And then, of course, it's really important for you guys to know whether it's a fire damper or a smoke damper. Smoke dampers are actually part of your fire alarm system. So they should also be functionally tested annually, because that's all part of your shunt trip on your HVAC when the fire alarm goes off. If you have smoke dampers, your air flow stops. A fire damper is typically a non-electric device. It's a fusible link in the chain, and if that fusible link reaches critical temperature, a lot of times it's 135. If it melts, then that damper closes. But again, you're inspecting, testing, maintaining these every 4 years. But that's why it's so important to know where these are located. Access to these are required, and then inspection, testing, and maintenance is expected, and then documented every 4 years. Operating features. Again, this is kind of a catch-all of items: fire drills, fire door inspections, hazardous materials, your fire safety plan. Again, this is a fairly lengthy policy. Required elements of this policy include the nine items listed here on the slide, from the, how you use alarms. Obviously, your fire alarm system has horns and strobes. And so you have an alarm system. Your alarms are initiated. How your alarm is initiated, that's the transmission, that's through the pull stations, also through smoke detection devices, and maybe even heat detection devices that are connected. You have the emergency phone call to the fire department, which is required. So somebody like incident commander will be the one required to call the person, the fire alarm company. I'm sorry. The incident commander would call your fire 911 service. Obviously, a monitored fire alarm also will send a signal to a monitoring company, which then they have 90 seconds to also call 911 or your emergency. So they want to, it's all about redundancies. It's all about overlap and redundancies. Then what is the response to alarms? The most basic would be race or racer, remove alarm, contain and extinguish, or evacuate. So whatever I would tell you is really more race is going to be remove, alarm, contain, and evacuate. Most of us don't have to worry about extinguish. I mean, you can certainly, but we are fully sprinkled. And so, what that means to you and what you've trained your staff to do. And then isolation of fire, your compartmentalization, obviously the shutting of doors. And then you have the evacuation of the immediate area, which goes back to R of race, removal anybody in harm's way first. So then, of course, you have evacuation of the compartment. Compartment is compromised where the fire is located. So with the evacuation, you evacuate individuals to a safe compartment, most likely adjoining the compartment where the fire would be located. And then the preparation of how you would begin the process, areas of refuge and such for evacuation of floors or the evacuation of the entire building. And then extinguishment of fire, the fact that you use fire extinguishers and smoke, and your sprinkler system. Mentioning the fact that you are a fully sprinkled facility, and how you go about doing that. But it's a fairly lengthy policy that you would have to have, and it involves things like having every individual type, whether it's administration, nursing, have their responsibilities during a fire as well. Then you do fire drills. We do one per shift, per quarter, per month, per quarter. So you have 4 fire drills on each shift for a total of 12 fire drills annually. You got to start them at different locations in your building, start them at different times of the month. Again, I was looking at a building the other day. Every single fire drill was on the 30th or 31st of the month. Every single fire drill for the past year. And that's not appropriate. They got to be varied times of the month. So first time of the month, second, middle of the month, maybe a Monday, a Saturday, a Tuesday, whatever. And then, of course, making sure all departments are involved, making sure you're documenting your fire alarm. Again, you are permitted to use it's called a silent drill, meaning that, if you want to not pull the fire alarm in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. to do a third shift drill, you can do a coded announcement, code red, fire in the kitchen, staff please act accordingly. And then hopefully they would know to close doors, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next morning you would test the fire alarm. See, testing the fire alarm during a fire drill is really a separate test. That's actually an FPA 72 test, which we test the fire alarm monthly to make sure that the signal is being sent to the fire alarm monitoring company or fire department, whichever one yours goes to. That signal is being sent to no, and it's being received within no less than 90 seconds. So you have to get the time your pull station was pulled or initiated and time they received it, and documenting the fact that that has been done. All that exercise has been done within 90 seconds. So during a regular fire drill, that's fine. And then if you do a coded announcement drill in the middle of the night, you would do it the next morning or the next day, you could test the fire alarm. While I am a strong proponent of plain language announcements and all emergency preparedness, and if I've done this with you guys before, some of you in Pennsylvania, I did fire emergency planning. I really believe in plain language announcements through the incident command system, but the code does say something about, use of coded language. So you would say code red, then fire. There's nothing stopping you from saying fire, and it's not shouting fire in a crowded theater, by the way, because actually in a fire, if there really was fire, you're not lying. The whole notion of yelling fire in a theater is to incite panic where there is no fire. But in a real fire, whether there's panic or not, saying there's a fire is completely appropriate. And so, but the code does say use coded language. So you say code red, then fire. to make sure people are aware of. And then, of course, you would give directions, location, hopefully, either the zone specifically, or maybe the room that it's in specifically, this information for the staff to use so that they can, respond to the fire emergency appropriately. And in this case, it would be a fire drill, but it's simulated. As I said earlier this morning, I just said, a policy that there is, in my mind, and I say this only based on the code, and I can go through this, but there is no path to compliance to use a space heater in a nursing home. So, the code prohibits them prohibits them in a resident sleeping compartment. So any zone of your building that has patient rooms in it, they're already just flat out prohibited, period. So then there's potentially maybe a zone in your building that does not have a sleeping room in it. So in theory, they'd be permitted. However, it goes on to say that if you are going to use a space heater in a non-sleeping compartment, you must have from the manufacturer a statement stating that heating element does not exceed 212 degrees. And I am not aware of, at this point, any manufacturer in this country that is stating such, which then goes back to my first statement. There is no path to compliance for a space heater. So your policy should say that. And hopefully they didn't find any in the last winter, but I would say I see them just as often in summers, guys. Some of your staff freeze with air conditioning, and so they put them under their desk. And even if you were permitted, even if you got a statement from the manufacturer saying, okay, the heating element only goes to 192 degrees, yay. Where do you guys see most of these? Under a desk. Well, let's pull up the manufacturer specifications. What does it say? Keep 3 to 5 feet from all furniture and drapes. Well, there again, there's no path to compliance because you just violated your own the manufacturer's specs. So again, no path to compliance for these devices. There's no purpose for these devices in facilities. Not that it doesn't get cold, I suppose, but it's not right. Smoking, if you do allow smoking on the grounds, staff or residents, you do have to have appropriate devices. You must have these 2 pictured items: self-closing metal ashtrays and an ash can. And then, of course, the issue of the ash can becomes, no trash in the ash can. And then make sure that the self-closing ashtrays are dumped down periodically into the ash can so that they are usable. But these are the 2 devices that are required. So those smoke towers and other types of ashtrays or ash cans, I suppose, may be present on your property, but they don't add to your compliance. So the most common situations that we see citations, of course, of smoking is smoke butts on the ground, where people just distribute or just discard their butts in the parking lot or in the grass, or worse, in the mulch, which, can cause a fire, by the way. And then, of course, that picture there, I hope that guy obviously is not smoking on oxygen, but that has happened a number of times. And, there are a number of examples where residents have been killed doing this. And then sometimes, of course, you have, inappropriate ashtrays, like a glass or a pop can or I guess they still have coffee cans, but yeah, all that kind of thing. So you have to really monitor smoking at your facility. Combustible decorations, again, though they were fully sprinkled, most of this shouldn't be a problem. You can cover the walls in a resident room up to 50% of the wall covered, including the ceiling, can have combustible material of like art or a bulletin board or whatever they want to attach to the wall. I've not seen many sites on this in the country. And then the other half is that the 30% of the compartment can be covered. So yes, again, the activities gym can have something. You can hang a quilt in the lobby, again, a bulletin board, framed art, whatever, in your lobbies, in your corridors, without any problems, because again, we are fully sprinkled and we are allowed to have combustible things attached to the walls in most cases. Now, of course, we're not allowed to have combustible things like corn stalks and hay bales and Christmas trees in our facilities. We can have UL listed Christmas trees that are fake, but anything that was cut live and then is now dead and in a bucket of water is not appropriate. And then, of course, in a few months when we have fall, I guess we haven't got to summer yet, but once we get past summer, when we get to fall, the hay bale and corn stalk season is not appropriate to be inside of a nursing facility ever. 900 series tags, we'll finish up with that in the last few minutes. 900 again is all going to be the K tags, the 900 series. Again, the book itself is going to be based on risk. The risk assessment under KTAG 901 is going to be where you assess your building's risk for the loss of these systems. Would it kill somebody, injure them, annoy them, or no impact? Category 1, 2, 3, or 4. Once you determine the risk, then from there, you have to follow the code in terms of what's expected to be seen at your facility. Now, there's some inspection, testing, and maintenance that applies to both new and existing, which I'm going to go over that itself. Most of that's going to be receptacles, whether it's GFIs or non-hospital grade receptacles, some generator issues, and then just your basic performance issues. Power taps, of course, KTAG 920, which was your third most commonly cited item in Pennsylvania. Again, is the use of power strips. Again, your goal would be is to be power strip free in your building in all locations. But yes, you could use these items if they were in KTAG. I'm sorry, if they were UL 1363A certified, which are $80 or $90 a piece. So it's really not a great option. But there is no path to compliance for non patient care equipment. So resident items like lamps and chargers and TV and anything that's theirs, residents, is not going to qualify for any kind of power strip of any kind of level. It's only for PCRE for temporary times that you could use a PCRE and a power strip that's appropriately certified. Not in the vicinity of patient bed. Most of your rooms aren't even big enough to do this, so it's not really applicable. And then in the offices and other parts of your building, as long as it's not medical equipment or other things we'll talk about in a second, you could use a UL approved power strip, but be mindful you can't overload them. And then the other items, of course, you can use a power strip in an office, but then of course can't heat and cool. So it can't be any hydro equipment. So no hair dryers and no space heaters and no portable air conditioners. So all of that stuff. And then, all of those things can't ever be used in a power strip, more extension cord. Again, if it's the activities gym and you have a TV set on the wall, maybe use a power strip for the DVD player and the TV together. That should be fine. Or a lamp. But, at my desk as administrator, when I've done that, I have a computer and maybe a printer and my phone charger probably, and that's all plugged into a power strip. Though I would really prefer to have it into a wall receptacle, but sometimes, again, just like patient rooms, many offices don't have enough receptacles. And then there is no path to compliance for these ever in healthcare. There's no multi-plug adapter that is ever appropriate, period. I mean, there's just not. None of these devices pictured here are ever permitted in a nursing home in any spot, no. What you really need to be doing is a solution is going from a dual plug to a quad plug or even bigger. I mean, I've seen 6 and 8 receptacles, but the whole point is that you're going to be increasing the number of receptacles, wall receptacles at your facility behind the resident bed, even in offices. That one on the far right is where you would wire in, and then there's a plate, then the four receptacles, that's where some of you have like concrete block walls, so you can't cut in very easily into your drywall around the concrete, so on the block. So you do this on top. It leaves about 1.5 inches of height, but it's a very good repair to add more receptacles. You're adding more receptacles to your building, which is perfect. Generator again. So a lot of things for generator, PM, annual, weekly, visual, monthly exercise. The visual weekly is where the weather is running or not. There's no requirement for the generator to run weekly. So you're looking at the generator from the prime mover back to the transfer switch, checking the fuel level, you're checking the belts and hoses, you're checking inside, making sure that there's no new bird's nests or whatever, no family of bears or raccoons have moved in, kind of thing. But the whole idea is that you're visually inspecting it weekly. You run it under load once a month. A loaded exercise is where you take it from pole power of your building to generator power. You're manually tripping the power, manually tripping the transfer switch. You can't be on a timer to count this. So you can't count a power outage as a monthly test either, because that's not a manual trip. A manual trip is where you do it. You push the button or you manually trip the transfer switch. Diesel generators are required to run no less than 30% of the nameplate rating of the device. So that's why you have to calculate that every month, see what your percentage of your load that you're calculated. Non diesel generators, so gasoline or natural gas, propane generators have no minimum load the way diesel does. And there's the only reason diesel does is they don't want to have wet stacking. So if you do that, if you do have diesel generators running less than 30% on each of your monthly tests, you would once a year, as another form of compliance, you would have a load bank test or no less than 90 minutes. The device is running pretty strong loads of 50 to 75%, which is really going to get rid of any oil and water or any actually water buildup, wet stacking that may have occurred because you're going to be circulating the fluid of the oil and hopefully evaporating off any excess water. 36-month exercise, where once every 3 years you're running your generator under load for 4 hours. Again, all these, whether it's a monthly or this exercise, the warm-up time and cool down time don't count. So like the monthly exercise is 30 minutes, but it's really how you run a generator for more like an hour. This is gonna be more like 4.5 hour run. So that's what you're recording on your meter reading is how long. So if you just write down 30 minutes every month, or you just wrote down 4 hours, that's not gonna be enough time. That's not appropriate. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion about the use of maintenance-free batteries, which is absolutely permitted. The code NFPA 110 here says you can use storage batteries that are maintenance-free. But if you use a maintenance-free battery, see, if you use a maintenance-required battery, then you have to do what's called weekly maintained, and you have to do what's called specific gravity, whereas you're testing the battery acid once a month with the spirometer, making sure that the battery has the appropriate levels of battery acid, which is kind of messy and hard to do, and et cetera. Well, if you have a maintenance-free battery, you have to get a conductance tester to make sure that the fitness of the battery is appropriate. So it's not just voltage anymore, not just voltage, it is conductance. One common sight across America is making sure you have a remote stop button on the generator. Now, it can't be on the generator itself, it must be remote from the generator. I can't tell you whether it's 10 feet or 20 feet. It's not inside the fenced area, let's put it that way. It's outside, it's on a post or a wall. It has a sign, remote stop. Obviously, in some cases, the generator, you would not be running during a fire or maybe even causing problems at the building. So you would have an emergency or remote stop button to that generator. This is expensive. This is a couple, $3,000, $4,000 to install an additional remote stop button. The panel, the annunciator panel to the generator must be at a manned location, observed by operating personnel. Most of you should have already moved these over the years, but I still see this citation where that, again, it's probably going to be at a nurse's station. Can't be in a mechanical room. It can't be at a reception office. The reception is not there 24 hours a day. If you're large enough, it could be at a security office. If I hear a CCRC or you have multiple levels of care, you may have a security office that's manned, that's fine. But most Stanley nursing homes is going to have it at a nurse's station. Fuel testing once a year, they said. You have it fuel tested and hopefully you have to show a passing test. Fuel tank storage, you must have a fence. NFPA 30 requires a fuel storage to be protected. So that fence around it, mostly it's 6 feet, metal chain link fence, has to be non-combustible, of course, can't be wood. And then that is locked, it's maintained locked. And then in addition to the protection of fuel, diesel fuel has to also have a 12-foot vent stack. So from the ground, the top of the vent stack must be no less than 12 feet to exhaust the burning of diesel fuel. Signage on diesel tanks or any tanks, period. Flammable, keep away from fire, so there should be no smoking near generators and their fuel source. Lastly, gas equipment, which for us is going to be the use of oxygen tanks. Again, the most basic oxygen storage is on the door, caution, oxidizing gases, ES stored within, no smoking. That's the only sign that's appropriate. And they will cite you for the non-use of that signage. So you must have that in that room. That must be locked. The cylinders must be segregated, so the full and empties must be separated. Some method has to be done, and then it has to be protected. Has to be locked and protected. It must have an automatic closer on the door, etc. If you have between 300 and 3,000 cubic feet, the door has to be locked. Has to have an automatic closer on the door. If it's outside the unit, the shed, as it were, must be no less than 30-minute rated, which means it's probably not going to be a Rubbermaid plastic shed you get at Sam's or Costco is not appropriate for oxygen storage. And then, of course, you have the appropriate signage on the door. Survey is going to be over, at some point. You have, either you can just correct the deficiency, you can formally dispute it. Some of you can do the fire safety evaluation, and some of you would be asking for a continuing waiver. It's up to you what you do. You may be working with individuals and consultants on some of these items, but it is up to you to decide what you do for your compliance after non-compliance has been determined. It's just so critical that you know your buildings, guys. I mean, some of you may not know where your automatic shutoffs are, whether your riser room, what type of generator you have, where your fire panel is located, how many exits do you have, where are your pathways, how are your sidewalks, what fuel type of your generator, how big is your generator. You just need to know everything about your building as best possible. And then you must have a system in place to test all those things according to the code, and then have all that done, and then ultimately have it all ready for your state surveyors or other AHJs who may be inspecting you, and have it documented. It means obviously if it doesn't happen, or if it does happen, you got to write it down. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Look at that. I am right on the 90-minute mark, Kim. Never done this before in my life. Kidding. This is not my first rodeo, but always surprising me where I get done at 90 minutes. But as I said earlier, guys, if you have questions, I'll be happy to stick around and answer any of your questions you have today. If you have any questions in the future, please feel free to email me. Obviously, Kim can get a hold of me, and as well as you can email me and watch your email. Hopefully, we will be having a Life Safety Code boot camp later this year in Pennsylvania, 2-day boot camp on all the ins and outs of life safety. Can we receive PowerPoints by email? Absolutely, William. If you want to get an email, obviously you can email Kim at Pennsylvania Healthcare. They'll be more than happy to send it to you, as well as if she didn't, or you can't receive hers, you can receive them from me as well.
Thanks so much, Ken. And yes, as a reminder, I'll be sending out today's presentation as well as sharing the recording. And I will send out the presentation today. If anyone does have any questions, you can always email me or Ken. I know, Ken, your email was on the Bill Culkins. Yeah, Ken, can you go back to your previous slide where your email is?
There you go. Yep, no problem. Yeah, it's Kenn, Kenn, at QISsurvey.com. I know I need to change it because I know the QIS survey doesn't exist anymore, but it's like changing banks. Nobody wants to change. Just leave it alone. It works. People get a hold of me. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Ken. This was some great information. And like always, you can reach out to me or Ken with any additional questions you might have after today. Thanks so much, everyone.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.